years since he recalled. And here he's also there. This is Father Adrian, not long before he died. And this is a drawing of him when he was in Optina. His wife had a friend, an artist. While the elder was there, she drew a picture. She drew this. It's a small drawing like this. We enlarged it. So the Nictari blessing her and the elder boy by the name of Seraphim, who later on was killed during the war in Berlin. And that's Father Adrian standing there. And this is Father Nika, the same one there, whose life remained. He was buried in 1930s or something. And his life was written by his spiritual daughter. Very interesting, whole big thick book they were able to was preserved, and so it's available. It's going to be translated someday into English language. Maybe somebody is doing this. So this Sebastian there, Salatin of Elder Nictari is mentioned there. His biography is, as you know, published in Orthodox Word, serialized, if you recall, and someday it will be a whole book. Now, about Father Adrian in three major points. Father Adrian was not an ordinary priest because he was not a student of seminaries or clerical caste, or even being prepared during his youth to be a priest. In his sermon, there is some material available about him. There's a little book by him of sermons called One Thing Needful. There's another one, a little by Father Servants, called Restoration of Orthodox Word, or The Way of Life, and others. And the thing that you just heard today, to my embarrassment, is going to be, of course, remodeled, rechanged, and is going to be a part of a biography of which we're working on. He, and his significance, he sort of started as a, not as an ecclesiastical person, but ended up an outstanding priest, the spiritual father of many, many bishops and nuns, and he founded a convent. And above all, he started a Christian commune, although they didn't like to use the term commune because it sounded like communist, you know. But it was a Christian family. They called it a Christian family. And about that, I would like to talk to you because the subject, our subject, pastoral theology, is bound up with missionary work, and he was an outstanding missionary. Now, point one. Father Adrian was born in a very rich family. His family was a tobacco owners, a tobacco company, sort of like Chesterfield or something. And was a very pious one. His mother used to drag them children to church very early in the morning, so like 5 o'clock in the morning, something like that. So they received this Christian, Orthodox Christian upbringing, as mentioned here recently about, we talked about how you're supposed to celebrate, spend Sunday, and they had this, he had this implanted in him from childhood, how to meet a day, how to encounter the rising of the sun, that is God's day. Like we have the morning prayers and evening prayers, they're in order to encounter the day. And then in the evening, in order to part with the day, like die, and we're supposed to, in fact, we're supposed to lay down and cross ourselves like this, ready to die, because the sleep is an image of death, you know. And then you embark into the rest which takes place at night. But those who are concerned for their salvation, they don't even sleep at night. They keep vigil. And canonically speaking, monks are not supposed to sleep. The canon says monks do not sleep. How to survive? Apparently. But what happens is that they rest. They just gently rest. They just gently pray and lay down. Perhaps the Archbishop John never lay down, he had no bed. They would just sit down in the chair and rest. because Saint Macarius of Alexandria, he even said, he tried various ways to war with sleep, and finally said, impossible. For a human being, it's impossible to war with sleep. One has to sleep. See? But monks are not supposed to, supposed to keep vigil, and then they snore a little, and go back again. They're not supposed to have, no pajamas and all that business. And it was just snore it and then back again, back again. So he was given from early childhood this understanding of our life here upon this earth as a battle for kingdom of God, which is revealed in such a way, as St. Paul talks today, that a man is lifted up somewhere and can't even explain whether he was in his body or not. So therefore, in his childhood, he was given the patriarchal way of seeing reality. The patriarchal system, wherein man knows his place upon this earth. He is no water hyacinth. He is no floater. Man knows where he is. He cannot say, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, this and that. Oh, maybe, yes, give me hamburgers. In other words, you lose part. You belong to the looseness of our society, so you can allow yourself to behave like that. A patriarchal society is that where you do not, it's a serious business. You won't get hamburgers here and there and all that, or live on welfare. You have to do something with your life. You're given, a life is given. And that's a serious job. You have to do something with your life. And so this attitude was implanted deep into him, even though he was not ecclesiastical family. So he was in a rich society. Then when the time came for him to go to college, he went to a business school and graduated it already during the communist revolution. And of course he graduated business school, which meant that there would be what? Society that would have private enterprise. But now there's no more private enterprise. Communist system is all one government. I mean, there's no private ownership. Everything belongs to the government. And businessman has no place. So in other words, you have to change the whole thing. So in this state of, because of this business thing, in this turmoil, he came to Obstina. Now, I do not know, unfortunately, how he found out about Obstina. How is that? I don't know. That's his wife. He already knew Obstina, see, before she met him. But he came to the elders and said that to them. I think it was Anatole. The big one, Anatole, was at that time, because he was popular. Everybody was there. And the elder looked at him and said, you must become a priest. He said, you have to take ordination. And he was baffled. Why? He was a businessman, he was supposed to, his parents were tobacco business and so on, and he should continue that. He says, you'll regret. In fact, he would not survive. Because he knew his temperament, he knew where his heart lies. Then in his sermon, before becoming a bishop, he explains a little bit. So you can read, that's in our Restoration Orthodox way of life. But the point is that he accepted that cross, or that burden, or that calling that the elder told him, and became ordained, and became a priest. At the time when whole society was turning against church, he, from the worldly society, sort of turned to church, and turned to church in the context of Obstina monastery, or in the context of Christian worldview, which views communism and all the materialistic ideas as diametrically opposite to that of Christianity. In other words, he automatically became, according to Soviet rule, enemy of the people. consciously accepted that cross, knowing what it meant. And of course, Soviets were after him. In his biography, you'll hear later on, there's very interesting incidents that encountered people, and elder told him to go. A certain professor gave courses, Yegorov. Again, I couldn't find anything about him, but supposed to be a very important professor. He wrote some books, Ivan Yegorov. And under his supervision, he and a group of other fellows who took that course, passed it, and then were ordained. And he was sent to a nearby church. And he only discovered that the church atmosphere, the patriarchal system, is a wonderful system, all that, but people got used to it, took for granted, and operated in it not for its real reason, but because that's the way it was set up. Because it was inertia, right? It's set, or it's set in motion, it goes on, and people don't think why, just accept it. In fact, liturgics is even taught like that. Fortunately, Mother Sophia here doesn't teach that way. They teach, well, after distropari, use distropari, and then there was such a feast, then that's all there is to it. In other words, but why? Why the whole thing? They don't give it, somehow they don't bother to inspire the people. And so he decided, since he was a sort of newcomer, born again, he decided to take upon himself both to study and thereby, by studying, share with people. So he used the medium of sermon, a way of self-education, and sort of, sing along with Glenn Miller or something. And sort of along together with him, you study, and this whole realm of the reason why we have patriarchal society would become clear, because the society was turning against this and embracing this new idea. The new idea, what communism was embracing, is very familiar for us. It's called rootlessness, actually. It's when there is, the idea is, it's a result of this Western apostolic philosophy, that there is no God. That's your private opinion, what your God or whatever, and that you cannot prove that there is God. Materialism is the only thing that really we can rely upon. Progress requires giving people, feeding people, and so on. And all this religion business and the Tsar, the government, this whole system of God's revelation upon this earth is actually, there's no need of it. We're modern man, we're free. We want to be free of all that. We want to make society deprived, or rather the society that would be free of this old baggage. When you lose faith, then everything about religion becomes very weighty, because it makes no sense. The whole religion is meaningful then when you're burning. When you're in faith, you're burning in faith. Then it makes sense. Then you can burn a bit. But if you don't, and so Father Adrian discovered the first thing, that Christians today, Orthodox, he was dealing in Russia, have lost the understanding of why they have within their hearts love for God and the whole system. They forgot that first love. And therefore it's a natural reaction that there is communism and this contemporary materialistic, because people have lost that primal love. And in order to have, and his parishioners are part of the society, so in order to have his parishioners be aware of what's going on, he has to teach them in such a way that they would be aware what Christ is all about, what's this whole thing about, and how to lead a life independent of the influence of the society. Thus, he logically came to the conclusion of catacomb pockets of activity or common life. In the Acts of the Apostles, we hear clearly that the Christians who followed Jesus Christ imitated the apostolic family that Jesus had. They had one purse. They had no possessions. They had apostles and their wives, epistles. They had apostles and their wives equal to apostles, not epistles, because epistles are very funny. I was hoping they would catch it. They don't catch it. So apostles and equal to the apostles, women, mare-bearing women, they had common life. They had one aim. The aim was, through the Lord Jesus Christ, to be hooked and get into the state of living in the Spirit, which Jesus sent on Pentecost Day, who would teach them what to do, inspire them, and make life living. In other words, the whole thing rested on this ethereal, this Holy Spirit, which it's not materialistic, you can't touch, you can't handle, you can't stir, you can't do anything, but it's there, and it vivifies, and it makes sense, and if you read the Bible, you get inspired. You get in a state of inspiration. The Old Testament, read Old Testament. Not all about these kings and all this murder, but the Psalms and so on, the wisdom, and comes out of many of them, exceedingly inspiring state. You almost are lifted up from the earth. That's why the Bible is holy. You feel it. And so he wanted Father Adrian to sort of, through his own personal experience, to practice that Christianity which the apostles had. And there's no reason for us to sort of be reactionary. It was too late. You can't save the Tsar. And Patriarchal society is falling apart. He's just one man. Most of the bishops went along. Most of the bishops turned new
The living church.
The living church and renovationists. They installed these new reforms, and they signed up with this concordats. And then in 1929, they even made a public proclamation that the joys of Soviet Union, the joys of Orthodox Church, and the sorrows of the Orthodox Church are the sorrows of Soviet Union. And Soviet Union destroyed them, killing them. And so the bishops began to issue laws, that is, decrees, that the people should pray for the government, Soviet government, whose joy was to kill off the monks, priests, and the Christians. Absurd. And one even said, well, does Stalin want us to pray for him? Because the bishops are supposed to pray for Stalin. See? And the question was, does Stalin want it? Somebody asked. He said, certainly not. Why should they? I don't believe in God. Why should you? So absurd. See? The absurdity is because you take for granted the whole system instead of going to the root. And Father Adrian was interested in the very essence. Of course, he immediately discovered that it's impossible under Soviet condition to have any catacomb communities because they're treated as anti-revolutionary organization. So it was impossible. So immediately he made an attempt, but practically speaking, they had no right to exist like that, and the only thing was allowed is just simple to people to come to church, and they even demanded that the sermon to be screened by the local KGB. You're supposed to write like a priest, you write a sermon, submit it to KGB, they'll check whether it's okay, then they'll turn to you, and then you take and come out from the altar and you read that sermon. See? So they wanted to control the church. It was clear that Satan wanted to use church to destroy it. Therefore tonight we will show you a movie. It's called The Prisoner. It's a Hollywood film starring Alec Guinness and Jack Hawkins is somebody. And it's the story of one of the Polish cardinals who was arrested by communists, and they wanted to use him in order to influence people. So the communists will brainwash him and he'll come and influence people. And it shows the battle between the man, the individual, the fallen individual, who believes in God and has no rights, this very bishop, and the interrogator, the torturer, who has all the rights in the world, doesn't believe in God, and turns out to be exceedingly weak. And there's a message, a very important message bound up with that subject. I want you to see to it. I beg pardon, it's a very poor copy. You can barely see it, you can barely hear it, but I have to say it. Now, because that message will come across, you understand what I'm talking about. Now, Father Adrian, therefore, knew that it is impossible to have any organization as a catacomb community. But the very essence of Christian community or Christian church is, like apostles, is a selfless group of people who are united in oneness of soul. So therefore, he said, okay, I can't give sermons and all that, but they're my spiritual flock, through confession, through just being me and serving liturgy, I will unite them. And sure enough, they very soon discovered, he and his group, I mean people who were with him, that you can be very effective teacher without speaking, without giving sermons, by leading a Christian life. And this says the flock, the sheep hear your voice, follow you. You don't have to particularly, they hear your voice and they just follow. You don't have to hit them over the head and instruct them. It's already, they can catch, because there's oneness of soul. And that's what the apostolic family had. So he, wherever he was, there was immediately a group formed around him who would, first of all, read von der Records. They would copy pieces of paper. They would confess. They would have coffee, services. And one of the main things he installed right away was DOS. DODS. No, DC. Right, daily cycle of services, or cycle of daily services. And he, without saying anything, he conducted that, which means what? It's like a monks. That's where it arrived from. So the whole atmosphere already very monastically oriented, and it was all centered around the services. Now that's external. Now internal, mind you, this is very important. What occurred? He found out, because I'm interpreting you in such a way, you have to understand. He found out that in order to retain one's attention and have some love or feeling or attraction to the cycle of services and all that, you have to have inward fire. The fire inward cannot be bodily, I repeat. It cannot be, as the fathers say, of the blood. The passions of the blood. It's not. It's selflessness, or fear of God, and no fear about anybody else or anything else. Nowadays we have this. We have this constant fear. Somebody comes and somebody steps on your toes. Your face will immediately change, immediately judge. Or this, or if you don't know, what is he doing? What is this? What is this? All this thing is pure fear of the world to be recognized, and lack of inward activity, or spirituality of the outside, not the inside. And what is the spiritual inside? It's hooked on one big thing, begins with C. What's that?
Constancy.
Who said that? What did you say?
Constancy.
Wrong.
Compassion.
Huh? Comfort, wrong. Humphrey, wrong. Candy, wrong either. Ice cream, wrong.
Contrition?
Right, who said that? Bless your heart, give him an A. That man deserves an A.
Raise your hand.
Man, that's A. Double A, give him. Right, confession. In other words, a daily life that is accountable to God and God's servant or witness, which is priest. In other words, a daily cycle of services has meaning only then if there occurs a definite, conscious clearness about one's state before God and the world. This science is called moral theology or ethics, Christian ethics. Man's attitude towards God and the surrounding world. And confession, therefore, consisted in the following. You not necessarily go and confess, enumerate your sins, but you are accountable to your own conscience. That whatever you do, whatever you feel, whatever goes on, you have to give an account. You have to realize. And that makes you F. Free. The problem of all Christians is that they are not free. They have these bonds of this world. They are afraid of their position. They are afraid of this. Constant. They're not free to say what. But because we're exposed to that all the time, we have a tendency to persuade ourselves that we believe in God and we like that and this and this. It's all persuasion. And that results, if you continue that and you don't have that inward account to God, that oneness of God, then occurs either you have a fit or physical sicknesses, or you get into satisfaction through praise. In other words, to make it simple, is this. A person wakes up in the morning and he dedicates his life to God. No matter what they'll say to you, whether you're smart or not, whether they like you or dislike, absolutely makes no difference. Because you belong to God. And all of a sudden comes and says, you're no good. Okay, that is, I accept this. Not because she's the logical thing. What, I'm no good. What about yourself? Look at your nose. Ha ha ha, he's dead. In other words, it becomes, we sort of bounce right back. Because we don't have inward world, which is hooked to God. We don't have the vision of God in us. So therefore, somebody says there's something negative, you immediately pour out this to him. And it's not so much your wrath, it's the realization that you are, somebody takes from you, deprives or steals from you good name. Shakespeare said that. Good name in men and women, dear my Lord, is the immediate jewel of their souls. 'Twas mine, 'tis his, and has been slave to thousands. But he who filches from me my good name robs me of that which not enriches him, but makes me poor indeed. Shakespeare for you. Bravo! Now, in other words, we care for our good name, our reputation, feeling good. She's very nice. Why do you think she's nice to me? Well, because I'm nice to her. And therefore we understand each other. We have, but in the moment I say she's no good, she immediately sees quite a bit of negative qualities about me. So the idea is this, that we have to be free of what the world thinks of us. And therefore we cannot, if we continue that, we cannot have God. It's that simple. Most of the people don't have God. Most of the people do not live in Holy Spirit. It's clear as anything. They live in constant chasing for self-satisfactions, some, Zara, how do you say it? Some some kind of substitutes. Zara, did you hear? Some substitutes that gives him sort of satisfaction, but not God. Zora, are you taking all those notes or not? How do you know about Zora? Never mind, that's my boy, you know. I know. Okay, so Father Adrian, and sort of, you heard, right, about the way he confessed? He confessed to use the idea of 20 tall houses. People are upset with that, but he used that system. So when a person comes to confession, if he doesn't often come, then he gets these questions. He bombards you 20 tall houses questions. So that he said, if you die, you already had knowledge of these things. See? He got used to it because many people would confess today and tomorrow is arrested and sent to Siberia and killed. See? Yes?
Did you say toll house questions?
Enumerated, right? You enumerated. I have that.
We didn't get that far.
Oh, you didn't? I specifically said that. Well, my whole thing is undermined. You did it. It's your fault. All right, in that case, we'll do this. We'll read that later on. Meanwhile, I'll simply tell you this, that in order to lead a spiritual life, you have to lead an accountable existence within your soul. That modern New Agers, they say you must feel good about yourself. Well, they are very true when they say that, because most of the Christians don't feel good about themselves. And how can you be good full of yourself when you're part of some kind of an organization? You have to be constantly in good sight of particular some kind of a group of people. And of course you are honest, so you can see the many negative things, so you feel squashed. So you do feel bad about yourself. But they don't turn to Jesus and don't turn to the principle of Orthodox confession, and therefore they seek these lulling approaches that will say you must feel good about yourself. You know, after you have a nice nose, could be a little shorter, but it's good enough so far. And they're worse people, so therefore feel good about yourself. See? It has nothing to do with Jesus. You're created in the image of God. You certainly should feel good about yourself because you're created in the image of God. What more can you ask? So therefore, the Orthodox Christians not leading a conscientious life, not confessing, not having constant checking, the checks and balances with what occurs in your heart, grow to accept church from the external aspect of church and make that a straitjacket. They in Catholic Church even have a term that says obligation. What's that term?
Holy days of obligation.
What?
Holy days of obligation.
Holy days of obligation. You know, if you don't, you are up. The whole idea of obligation. See? In one sense, you don't have those terms. It's meant, sure, you're supposed to, but it's not forced. You're supposed to feel that you are in the kingdom of God. Jesus says you're a kingdom of God. It's supposed to be kingdom. You're supposed to feel that the kingdom of God is within you. That's the state. So Father Adrian was worried about this thing. And he therefore even thanked communism. He didn't say that, but I'm putting it in this way. That it cleaned up. It threw away all that element that relied on the externals. These traps, these churches traps. And Lenin is right when he says the kingdom of lantern oil. Boring oil. When you deprive yourself, even deprive for Jesus Christ, I'm depriving myself of spam. Why? As if God wants you not to have spam. Spam is great. You know, we'll discuss that. That's a very important point. But God is fullness and a wonderful thing, and you must be hooked to it. So, Father Adrian, was in a situation where he couldn't speak as he would want to. He couldn't have missionary schools as we have here. He couldn't come out in the Burger King and say, there is Jesus Christ and all that business. You couldn't do it. You could be arrested, killed. But he nevertheless stood on that position. And the position was this conscientious attitude towards daily confession. who are living, starting from the morning, as I said, you begin the day with the dedicated to God, and everything that occurs comes from God's providence. And then when something negative occurs, you shrink a little because it's scary and unpleasant, but you trust God, that is, comes from Him too. There's even a little sermonette, it's called At Меня это было. In the 30s, they came out with a little brochure that was popular. It says, it was from me. In other words, Jesus says that all those things that happen, I'm involved. Don't worry. When somebody gets blind and all this, I'm involved somehow. It's probably good for you. See? Just trust. Just have. That's the attitude of having faith in God. Okay, that's point one. Point two, because he could not externally do this Christian community, which he felt that's very necessary, but he lived this, therefore he was surrounded with people who adored him. That is, they loved him because he was, not particularly he liked people, he didn't particularly, he was just himself. He didn't do anything special. See, no special kissing or worrying and all that was like I do. I feel terribly sorry for everybody. He did. He was a normal human being, So people just followed him. They felt that he's got strength. They felt that he has something that they can live with, that gives them strength. And what occurred is that, of course, he became an object of persecution, communists, and so on. His biography shows that he was thrown one place to another. Finally, he was on that board where everybody's supposed to be arrested, and he wasn't. Instead, St. Herman saved him, and instead he got into his home, in his closet, and there he daily celebrated services. And meanwhile, one of the monks, Vincent is his name, was arrested by Soviets, and then was to be exiled. Soviets wanted to arrest all monks, and Elder Niktari, seeing that will happen, started sending his monks to various lay people. And so one of them is called, name is Vincent. He was sent to Father Adrian to hide him. So Father Adrian took him in and hid him. And he describes him. We have that in English in our catacombs saints a little bit, that this fellow was all the time in prayer. He was always cheerful, quiet. He was like, and then when Father Adrian would come all upset because this and that, he would come and he would be total silence, inward sort of immovable, inward peace. And he drew a lot from this Vincent. Okay, that's when the Germans came. As bad as the Germans were, first thing they did, they allowed people to have churches. So all churches automatically were open. Immediately miraculous icons came in and banners, the whole thing was filled with again. And Father Adrian, then seeing the possibility, he formed a community. That community existed in the following way. They had people of various professions who were his spiritual children, would live wherever they lived, would chip in money into the common sort of purse, whatever they could, and they were taking care of, they had various activities. For example, there was a doctor. He, of course, he didn't even marry in order to be fully available to everybody. He sort of took upon himself as a puppet. There was another man who was a lawyer, he became secretary of Father Adrian, Dmitry Meshetsky. He was sort of promoting all this. There were various groups. There were women that would take care of the dead, for example. There was famine, many people died, or diseases, and they had this group, committee, these women that would take care of these dying. They would give even Holy Communion to prisoners and to all this. Then there were the people who were in charge of helping children, the whole idea of nurseries. Then the whole old men, the old people. Then many people were emotionally disturbed because of these wars and the losing everybody and bombing and all that. There would be sort of shattered individuals. They had to have a group of these people who took care. So there were artists, iconographers. Bishop Niktari's sister was an iconographer. She She was a poor iconographer, but she drew pictures and so on, and was great. And Bishop Nictari also joined him, and Bishop Nictari at that time got a job as a decorator of theater decorating. So he was decorating this, and meanwhile get money. He would get some food from those actors, and it would bring to the community. They would feed. With this group, he was able to evacuate. This group of his was given the convent of protection, convent of Mother Sophia. There's the wife, Mother Sophia. Sarah, show Mother Sophia, right there. She was in charge of this convent, but the Soviets took her away, so he knew her, but at that time she wasn't anymore. And he made a hospital. They revived the hospital, but the hospital on Christian principles. That the nurses would wear a cross, like Red Cross, and they would be semi-monastics, like Elizabeth Fjord's idea. There were all these brotherhoods. His community could be called brotherhood. Actually, that's what it was. But I used the community because you will know that there was an attempt to have common apostolic family. And many people lived, yes?
Did they live together?
Some did. Like some people had the jobs, they was away, but others they lived together. Yes, they had whatever Father Adrian was. They would have like hotels. Later on, they were in Germany. Then the Germans would give them the whole hotel, Gasthaus, and they would live like that. Yes.
Didn't they start out living separately though?
Yeah. Well, some of them continued living separately, whatever was convenient. See, but there was a group, and that group that lived closely, they conducted services. And the services, monastic services, they were, after service there was a common meal, and if there's not much to, that was whatever they had, piece of bread, that's all they had. But they were common together. And of course he was feeding them mostly all these talks, we have found the records, all the big things, Holy Fathers, and the books of Sergei Nil, it was fascinating, he would read. He had people who were, there was one woman from opera and theater. So there would be these readings, these singing, all kinds. There was a big activity going on. And when the Germans began to retreat, they gave to his community the icon which was painted during the life of Saint Seraphim. Huge icon, that big, the canvas portrait, his full-length Saint Seraphim. And they would roll it up and present it to him, and he took this, and he was traveling to Europe, to Germany, and finally came to, now it's Spring Valley, New York. They have this in the frame, you can see. It's preserved as a holy object. Painted during the life by Severenikov, during the life of Saint Seraphim. And this community they were living in Kiev, was evacuating. War was raging. The Germans were shipping people out, lots of them, like Father Vladimir got like that shipped out, some by force, like Father Vladimir. Others free, others were deliberately asked to come in a very polite manner to help out, like various interpreters and so on. So they gave this community hall one railroad car. So he filled with all his people. And they traveled like that out of Kiev. The train reached Berlin. They came to Berlin, and there was, in the main cathedral, bishop, who at one time was renovationist or something, but he accepted him, yes.
Why were the Germans so willing to bring the Russians with them?
Oh, not willing. That's Ostarbeiter, mein Lieber. Kannst nicht verstehen? Das ist sehr, sehr wichtig. Ostarbeiter, arbeiten. Zu arbeiten, bitte übersetzen Sie. Dieser junge Mann kann es.
Laborers, workers. They used them for ineffective.
Free laborers. They had a special thing like this. Ost means east workers. You can't appear anywhere without that. That means you're like slaves, the idea of slavery. And some of them, they didn't. Those people didn't buy because it's a church, and the Germans very, very good towards religion, very, very supportive and so on. So that's they would get some kind of chandelier or handle some kind of a stuff to it. So they came to Germany, right Berlin, and there were all these bombings. And one day, I told you this business of how they were bombing, remember, and to save Then there was one day, the bombing was, they ran quickly, and his son, he was just, I think he just got married. Just got married, 2 days. In fact, they lived in Santa Barbara, there's a lady lives there, was there with him, she still told me that they just got married, I think they got married on Sunday, and on Tuesday or something, or even the same day or something, they had this, air raid, and people started running, and the bombs all over. And Father Adrian, and he sees they run, and he sees his son is falling down. He lifts him, like that, so like this, and half of the head is gone. His own son. Half of the head is like that. It was a splinter, And it's Simon. And there was that. He was the God's son of Elder Anatole. And his wife remained. She's somewhere. And his second boy is now a doctor. He's surgeon, and his godfather was an Elder Nick.
Where is the second one?
He's in New York. He's a big shot now. He's in the, because Father Adrian liked very much medicine. Peter, he liked very much farming and theology and medicine. So he was always hoping that people would become doctors and dentists and so on. Yeah. Or farmers. He preferred doctors. He was pushing towards doctors mostly, because if you can't become a doctor, then it's easier for you to become a farmer. And if you can't become a farmer, then might as well become a priest. Like that bishop told us, remember? When deacons lose their voices, then they're qualified to become ordained priests. But when those priests lose mind, then they can become bishops. Now, I hope it's not recorded. All right, now he began to, there were a whole series of incidents how he saw a dream. He woke up and this doctor, his Anatole Pouch, he says, I saw a terrible nightmare, terrible dream. And he says, Bachka, what did you see? And he said, I was running. There were guns all over. And we didn't have any place to go. And all of a sudden I see a thin bridge, a huge abyss, and a thin bridge. And I said, come on! And everybody ran out. And we escaped. Hardly did he finish talking when all of a sudden they started bombing. It turned out to be, they were in the southern part of Germany, where the war ended. The French zone, the Soviet, the English, and the American ended up there. And they started the guns all over. And all of a sudden they say, the tanks are coming. And from one side, tanks are coming, the Germans are this, and another side, another tank. And they both pointed at each other. And all of a sudden, Father Adrian said, take things. They had those, the icon and major icons. He grabbed the cross. He said, follow me! And right between the tanks. And they stopped. And they went, shh, right into the woods. And then they continued. So that's exactly what that bridge he saw in the dream. Come to on that very bridge between. But he was fearless. He was absolutely fearless. And of course he was constantly sick. He was constantly in pain. He had ulcer, he had asthma, he had, oh God knows, everything. Finally ended, this Alzheimer's disease, everything. And he was all the time, and he would serve, all of a sudden they say, and then the next thing you know, they carry him out of the altar, side door. And then another priest would end up. Then they have liturgy, during liturgy there was the bombing, and then after the bombing, then they would forbid to people to walk on the streets because all these shells still remain, some not exploded bombs with it. So they're supposed to stay. Sometimes for almost a day you sit in the, so they had to feed them. So they had to, in church, they had to create this place where they can feed them, so they can exist. And that's where he comes in with servants, these stories, the whole world, from the recluse, the ops and the elders, the whole thing. So they sit there, bombs all over, and they're transported to this world of saints. See? What occurred is that there was a case that these Ost workers in Berlin, and they were hungry. Although Germans did feed, but I myself was in those camps, so I know. I was a little boy then. They would give, you know, the brown pumpernickel, you know, the thin bread, with a piece of bread, but that big a piece of bread, and then a piece of margarine, that big. But everybody would get. Nobody would be without food. And they were very organized. Even though they themselves didn't have. The poor farmers wouldn't have any. But all those prisoners and those emigres, and everybody had that. So once he had a lady that she wanted to be a nun. But then when the monasteries were closed, so she joined Father Adrian and became a nanny to his boys. And she was really dedicated, and one of those, you know, the myrrh-bearing women, you know, she was around there and suffers and and, you know, pours oil and wine on the wounds and one of those things. Like Sister Xenia, that type, you know, long suffering. And so, one Sunday, for some reason, the Germans, I guess they were retreating a terrible time, and they somehow they allowed people to go on Sunday to church, a lot, almost everybody. And so they started service, and all of a sudden he sees the church is packed with these, you know, Russians and Ukrainians, those who were Germans took, and they were standing there all, they're hungry for the Word of God, and also hungry for food. And he says, you know, peace be unto you, and then sees all those people. And then he says, get Paula here. Paula, this is that woman. And says, Paula. She says, what is it? She says, all those people, we got to feed them. She says, Bashko, we have nothing to feed them. You have to feed them. Paula, get anything. God bless you. God bless you to figure out what to do. And she says, Milosevitsu. And he blessed. And she took all the women that she knew, and they divided this whole blocks. Each door, those women would come and say to those people who live in those neighborhoods, say, please give something because we have those people starving. And when the service, and he continued the service, he was praying, sweating, praying. And finally he says, Paula, go, Paula. Paula put her nose into the altar. He says, ready? She says, ready. And so he finished service, and a big sermonette, you know, then gives holy bread and big pieces as much as they can. And it says, everybody goes downstairs for agape. And he says, and they come down, and everybody had some soup. So they put together, you know, soup, your style, you know, peanut butter and cherries, and little tomatoes, and 3-day-old oatmeal, and stir it all up, and put some soy sauce, and it's great. And everybody had some. And then the person who told me about it, he said that, she said, that's Mother Ksenia, and she says, we came down, and the steaming food was there. And she says, we just received Holy Communion, we are filled. And that's all that's needed. We could live forever. We're so filled. Just the care, that's all about it, see? You know, he prayed, and he sees those people, and the logical thing, we would say, oh no, all those lazy bones, empty stomachs come here, what am I going to do? Or someone says, get them, get out. We can't afford, we don't have enough people. We don't know. Get them, get out. Or say, divide, every third person stays, in other words, get out. Or some kind of combination, say, just announce, go home, you know, God, you have nothing to feed you. He didn't say that. He had no food, nothing. But he saw there is a need, and there is God, and he's a priest, and there is a spoiler, a good girl that you can rely upon. She's ready to do anything. And also she was just catching the blessings. See? And he blessed her, she caught it, and imagination, inspiration got those women and all of that, and the whole feast out of nothing. Now that is Christianity. See? Then they went to, after the war, they went south to American zone. And there they were given some kind of a hotel or some kind of room, and then they lived there, that type, daily cycle of services. They had the icon of Saint Seraphim, and then also icon Elder Victari blessed him with Vladimir, Mother of God icon. You have that, right? And yes,
Could I ask, I mean, these were Russian prisoners who had been brought to Germany to be
No.
laborers?
they were Russians, Ukrainians, Kiev, and for all others, people who were Orthodox, who on the way as he traveled joined his group, see? And they were all homeless. They wouldn't want to go to communism. So they were hoping to get to free countries. Well, they were glad in Germany, but Germany, half of Germany was taken over by communists. So they were fleeing more west. Some went to France, some went to England. Belgium had a huge, that's immigrants. You know, this war from immigrants who refused to return to communism, to Russia. And there's an organization, UNRWA, United Nations Relief, Refugee Relief Organization. There's refugees, actually, see? And so they would join. And then by 1945, 6, 7, 8, 9, then they started, various countries started offering them to come to, like Australia, Morocco was a big community, New Zealand, Canada was a huge one, of course America mostly, and England, many went to England. And so they were able to immigrate. And as they were coming, finally in 1949, he, with his group, was able to come to America. He came to America, to New York, and a bishop there, of course there was war, the wars between jurisdictions and all the business. Father Adrian, I don't want to touch this, but Father Adrian was against that. But he ended up, when he came to America, he ended up in the synodal because of that. One of the bishops offered him to start a convent, sort of grabbed him and said, make a convent, we need. And it turned out to be that in Shanghai, there was, of course, the famous convent of Abbess Ariadne, which is now in San Francisco. And she had hundreds of these orphans and also nuns, very from old Russia and very traditional and so on. And there were some nuns or girls who wanted spiritual life, but didn't like very much Ariadne because she was very, very cenobitic. Her emphasis was too cenobitic. They needed a little bit sort of contemplative thing. So one girl, actually three of them, Michaela, Christina, and Gabriela, came to Archbishop John and said that, you know, we would like to lead spiritual life, but we somehow don't fit into much Ariadne's convent. What shall we do? He said, that's okay, it's okay. I'll give you the rule. You stay at home, you do it your own. It's like a ski thing. It's fine. We just do pray for that and do. Can you preserve her? This lady, she was wife of a policeman, chief policeman in Shanghai, and communists at that time were shooting. You know, they would, you know, kidnap people from. You know, they get these spies would come over and to various to France. Lots of people were killed. In Spain and so on, these communist, you know, agents. And so he was killed, her husband, and she was all upset, and she went to an elder in Shanghai, Michael, who was 100 years old, and he sort of directed her what how to do. And then they went to Archbishop John. Archbishop John said, fine, you stay here, and so on. And so when Archbishop John was moving out, because the communists were coming in Shanghai, then they went to up New York area. And so this bishop, local bishop, had those three nuns. And Archbishop John said, you know, take my, do something. So he said, well, Father Adrian is coming. And Father Adrian, no, so why don't you? So Father Adrian came and started. Before he did, he came to California here. Because Bishop Niktarimino was here, right here near the river here. Right here on that river road. right on there, on the Russian river, there was some Russians living, and he was thinking of starting a convent there.
Adrian?
Yeah, he was, Bishop Ignatius took him, he was no bishop, then he was just a monk. And Father Adrian looked around and I guess he didn't work, so he came back to New York and he started this convent. What occurred is that they already had a lifestyle like a convent, see? So automatically all those women that were there with him, they became nuns. So the men, some of them became priests, two of them, one became they were sent to Jerusalem, became the head of the Jerusalem mission, Herman Dimitri. Bishop Niktari was with him all the time, joined Bishop Tikhon here in San Francisco, and so on. He started this group. But being a man of these ideas, he loved the idea of America. Because America is a place where people escape for freedom, starting with Mayflower, right, with the Plymouth community. So he was very inspired, and he thought, perfect. It's freedom, America is interested in religion. You can see lots of churches, although they fight, hundreds denominations or jurisdictions, and also jurisdictions follow the denomination system. So there's lots of religious things, and what we need is, he called it Ugalok Svятої Rusi, a little corner of Holy Russia. In other words, to plant into the American soil this idea of common Christian life. See? Well, the idea is great. God helped him. At first they were given a place which actually was an elephant house. There was a rich man who loved elephants and got an elephant and built a house for him. Lovely gazebo with that. And this poor elephant was living there, and I guess he was very lonely for Mrs. Elephant. So this the lack of love for Amur, elephant Amur, caused him deep heart troubles, and finally this poor elephant died out of lack of love. So because he was so lonely. And so the place was empty, it's full of elephant manure, Peter, full of elephant manure, and they said, well, we can use that. He said, oh, great. So he went there, and they started cleaning up that elephant manure, and fixed it up, and started living there and making it into a convent, see? But, of course, they were looking for a better place. And then they found out that there was a Roman Catholic convent, that they're moving some other place, and they're willing to sell, but on the one condition, that will also be a monastery. So dedicated to God, see? So they were right there. And there was one poor man who was a Russian man, and he was paralyzed, but he had money, so he put it in, and so they got the land, but there were statues. And there was a statue of Jesus Sacré-Cœur, see? Sacré-Cœur. The Sacré-Cœur, Jesus did. And they said, the zealots, Orthodox zealots, oh my goodness, that idol, take that idol down. And Father Adrian said, yes, of course, that's what I said, but I have no heart to take that down. Well, we own the place, don't we? Then we're supposed to resort. We're supposed to get rid of it, obviously. This is a statue, They don't believe in statues. It's unorthodox and canonical. And Father Adrian couldn't. With all his power and strength, he couldn't overcome this. And he said, put that statue near my window. But there was one wall and another wall, and there was bushes and beehives, and there was a place, and you could put that. Save Jesus. And so, up to today, that statue is there. And of course, the poor Father Adrian was judged to the max, that Catholic Roman papist. And so on. But nobody actually could dare to say too many bad things, because everybody was up at arms to defend him. They loved him. He was great. Everybody loved him. Those that knew him. Now what occurred is that they bought a piece of land, started the cemetery, which is now thousands and thousands of graves. And on one side they bought another piece of land, and he built there 6 or 8 houses, a road, 6 or 8 houses, and he was offering people to live there with the idea that they will start a little Christian community. Sort of like a Rose Avenue situation, only without a swimming pool. Because a swimming pool is a sign of decadence. Yes, you object to that? You can swim in the canals.
Did he have basically the same group with him that he came
Yes.
to with?
Yes, he had the same basic group, but people, of course, knew people would come. And nuns became a convent, so of course nuns, people who wanted to become nuns, they came all over. It would have nothing to do with his group, see?
And his
So,
wife was still alive?
yeah, his wife was there, and the boy went to American colleges, yeah, university, became a doctor. And his wife was the very one, she died in 1960, something like 70, 72 or 70 something. She was a very tough woman, very loving. She was very nice to me. Many people hated her because she was protecting her husband. And so there's somebody comes and she said, don't you come here. She was like a hawk would stop me. And she jumped at me also once. But she at the same time would very much so chisel out, and then she said, come, now we can do it, come on. Because he was overburdened all the time. But I would come to him maybe every second month. I would come for a weekend, see? And they would always drag me right into his vestibule, and she would find time, and then she would say, now get out, come right now. Come, exactly this way. She wanted very much me to be with him, see? So I had a very good feeling that he really cared, every bit, every moment. He was so busy, hundreds of people, and those funerals, they had all these endless ones, because that's how they survived, see? You know, that's where the money would come in, see? And so she told that. But the thing is this, that they had great difficulty too, money-wise. And there, very often, because he would send some of the nuns to work. For example, like babysitting. I remember they came, and I was full of big ideas, you know, and came, and nun came, said, Bachka, bless me to go to the world. So, no bogus. And then he says to me, Подвижница, that's really much Agnia. I said, what? She said, you know what? I bless her to go to babysit. And she sits there the whole night through, she does Jesus prayer. Whole night through. She can't do it in the monastery, she has all kinds of things, has to sleep. But then she feels it's her duty. So while the baby snores, she does the Jesus prayer non-stop. And then there were, of course, others. The abbess became a schema abbess. You could barely see her. She was mostly in her round room. And when she would come, she wouldn't talk. She had the schema, always see her nose sticking from the schema like this. That's all. So, you know, schema like that. And I was told she was a very holy woman. There was an interesting incident. She was sitting one day in a gazebo. Had a gazebo from the main church to the nuns' quarters. Little like a lawn, and in the middle they have a little gazebo where the sisters sit and wait for service. So, you know, benches, they can, old ones there. And my sister dashed through it, and all of a sudden, she looked at my sister, and my sister saw her first time, you know, with this cacao, and she says, Machka, bless me. And she looked at my sister and began to weep. And kept on weeping and weeping. And after that, all that story started. This crazy boy proposed to my sister, and then this whole big thing. So we cried for a long time. So that was a prophecy, obviously. She saw right through that what happened. Then interesting thing is that they would be hungry very often. They wouldn't have nothing to eat. And one day, Father Adrian was actually literally driven to the fact that something must be done. And he would, you know, they'll pester him. Oh, there's no oatmeal. Oh, there's no bread. What are we going to do? Oh, you must do something. Oh, no. Say, well, what can I do? We have to figure it out. Said, all right. Okay, sit down. So he went right out to town. And this Spring Valley is a place of Hasidic Jews, one of the big centers of Hasidic Jews. And of course, you know, many of those Hasidic Jews had come from Russian area. So they have synagogues and whole communities. It's a big thing. And I guess he knew her. Then anyway, he was walking and was hoping to get something cheaper, some food. And he walks, and all of a sudden he sees there's a big fish store, fowl and fish, poultry, and that was the store. And there's a fish on the ground in the gutter. Big, nice fish like that. He looks, and he sees it's like garbage, see? So he lifts the fish and smell. Is it any good, see? So he smells the fish. That's not too bad. And the question is, can you take it? And there the door opens up, and there stands the proprietor. And he says, "Oh, Batishka!" He's Jewish. He is Jewish from and he never seen a batchka in America. He said, "Oh, Russian batchka, what are you doing here?" He says, "Well, I got this fish. I got this fish. I'm sorry, but I saw it on the ground and take. Well, I'll throw it away. It's not good." "Oh no, it's not bad fish at all. Maybe I could have it." So what do you want the fish for? Well, I have nuns. I have people that have some. That'll be a good dinner. See? He says, "Ruski batya and has no fish. Me, I'm from Russia. I'm, a Russian Jew, and will allow a Russian batya, Russian pop, they call it, Russian, without any fish. Until the day I die, you're going to get fish twice a week." If my business, he said, "You pray for business. My business goes, you're going to get everything." And every time you come there, there's fish and kasha. You always give her. And he did. He kept his promise. And he kept it until I left. There was always, every time you come, there's kasha and fish. That's amazing. He supplied it. See? Then another thing is important, is that Father Adrian would confess people. People would come all over for confession. Not that he did anything particular. I guess they would come because of the atmosphere, the church and the cemetery and the convent. They wanted to unburden. And Father Adrian nothing special confession. Didn't give any sermonettes or something. You just repent. Let's just next. Nothing particular. But being a man of God, you see, right? So if you come with something, all of a sudden he bombards you, makes a statement, which you never thought about. But actually, according to the law of spiritual life, that is the cause. See? Like lust, for example, attack of lust. There's a particular reason why it's a spiritual law. And you don't have to be all upset and all that. There's a particular reason. The same thing with hatred. For example, wrath, hatred, is direct result of craving for sweets. Diminished sweets, and I don't mean chocolates either. And Hershey bar included. No, it means feeling for sweet. Comforts and compliments and being really nice and feel like a Zorro, something like that. Always pampered and sweet, everything's nice and all that. That's called craving. So you're craving with a sweetness, the result will be, you'll be full of anger. And you go, "How dare you say that, how dare you, that's my cup, you took my cup." And also, well, what's the difference, all right. So and then you wonder, what in the world do I get all upset about the wrong cup? Actually, because there's inward some kind of a craving. In other words, he identified your sickness and cause, and he would give you what's the problem. And some people, and he would hate when people call him starets. And Abbas Serafima, he told me, "Don't you ever, you'll be his first enemy. Don't you ever say anything about that he's a starets." But he did act like a starets. He was spiritually sensitive. He knew you. He had experience. He knew what was going on. He suffered, and also he created a whole group, society, on that very principle. So when you come to that group, you feel spiritual. Like for instance, I would go to one weekend in a month. Every second month, I would go to either Jordanville or Novidsville, to him. And in Jordan, the whole atmosphere, beautiful singing and iconography, and the seminary there, and Archbishop Avierki gives a tremendous sermons. It was a whole atmosphere with the wind-swept beauty there and so on. And it would be very aesthetically inspired. And then next weekend I would come, and I hated the whole thing. Look, Dostoyevshina, all these half-wits there, all these poor people, and this constantly dissatisfied babies screaming, and the kingdom of Lenten oil. But the whole thing was absolutely lost comparing to him. He was so strong, so energetic. He was it was quick. It felt as if he was on roller skates in the altar. He was there. And he knew, and he would come out and confess, and all of a sudden he jumps, and said, yes. And it goes on. In other words, he felt that there's something wrong. And he was mad. He was really passionate. He would really rip you apart. And then all of a sudden, blesses and kiss you. And you you've been like a whole, a whole dose, and then it's sealed up with love, a kiss, and you are free. You can breathe again. See? He knew it. He felt it. And of course, many people didn't like him because he was not calculating. He was not everything ordered. There's chaos all over. There's no order, particular order. There was none of this, like how do you do? Sort of no leisure whatsoever, no yawning whatsoever. Everything was fast, quick, and then collapse. Because he gave himself away. He was constantly crucifying himself. It is clear. And that didn't catch. Our American complacency, our American craving for fun, comfort, and satisfactions did not go for what Father Adrian was. And therefore, he had no followers. He had very few people there's no story about him written, nothing. He was a super priest. Every bishop, Solzhenitsyn went to him. Everybody went. When he died, nothing. One thing is that Jordan was very jealous of him. Father Cyprian couldn't stand him. He's still alive, and he can't stand him. Because he goes, prelist, using prelist. Because Father Adrian came from this crisis when the society, Orthodox Christian society, is known as Holy Russia, actually, consciously, bowed down before Antichrist, which is modern materialistic society. And he couldn't take that, because he was raised in that. He couldn't take that. So he decided to recreate his own. He couldn't war against them, so he created his own world and lived in it and drew people in it, and I'm part of it. Do you understand? He did not accept what is the world is coming up. That's why when I came to him, he was talking all the time about piety and about writing and writers and so on. He wanted very much me to. In fact, he spoke more about writers to me than holiness. And that's why I'm bound up. I know, he sort of prepared me, and I'm now bound up writing and publishing and all print and all that business. And I have nothing to do with holiness. It's all gone. not knowledge, anything. But writing all these books and everything. So he prepared me for that. But one thing is that when I would come to him, one day I came, and it was late already. And he says, he didn't serve. And I came, and his Machka says, come in. Machka says, so I came in. He didn't go for the vigil because he was sick. But she called me, and I came, and he already sitting down. I said, you're supposed to be very sick. He says, yeah, it's a little better now. I said, I want to tell you this and that. We don't have much time. And so we talked, and all of a sudden, he looks at me. He was inspired. He grabbed my hand. Big, warm hand. He grabbed me. He said, come on. And took me to the church. And they were painting at that time the frescoes. They were so excited that there's a church dedicated to Saint Seraph, and there's all kinds of Saint Seraph praying, Mother of God appearing, and all this. So excited, and then the stars came out. He told me, "You're an artist. You're supposed to." I was painting icon of Saint Seraph at that time. Just painted, told me, and he says, "The pictures speak more than words. So therefore, these Americans come. They don't know Russian, but let's see. They get the point. They get the point. See." And then take me out, and all of a sudden, the sky was full of stars, and he says, "I wonder." Something to the effect, "I wonder, why did we, as a wave, were splashed from Holy Russia to this continent? But see those stars. There are so many people, American people, who want to get that what we were sent from Russia to give. He worked for that." In other words, he was aware of the missionary apostolic firm. He died on Peter and Paul's day, apostles, and was named Andrew. I never wanted to figure out why was he named Andrew, but when his Machka died, then they made him a monk, and soon after they made him bishop, and he named him also apostle, after apostle. I saw him about a couple of years before he died. It was my last time. That's a very touching thing, in which when he gave me this portrait, he said, "I want to give you something from me." And he started portrait. I said, "Oh, I don't want your portrait. I want something from you." And he said, "Oh, you don't want?" Okay. So he took it away. And he said, "I'll give you something." And he gave me a petrohelium and cuffs, which burned, except for one cuff, on my fire. And I said, "I don't need it." I don't need it. I was a monk. I don't want to be a monk. He says, "Well, okay. You don't want it. That's fine. But you asked something from me, okay? But this is something from me. Maybe someday you'll use it. In fact, you will use it, all right." Whether you like it or not. He said a couple other things. Now, so I was saying that he was not successful. He was a very successful priest, a wonderful priest, inspiring. Everybody loved him. Everybody, Metropolitan was his spiritual son, and so on and so on. And he was a great friend of Shekhavskoy. Shekhavskoy buried his son, the one who died. He was very much he was against jurisdictions. They judged him that he gives Holy Communion without, he has that sacred cur in his garden. And that he is, and he breaks the fasting law because of his state had yogurt or something he had to take. So in other words, he has this and that. They judge him left and right. Because it takes a battle to follow the type of life he was promoting. And American society is based on fun, comfort, constant self-pleasing, entertainment, and so on. And the reason why his community did survive, that is because they had terrible persecution. That's why in Russia they were able to be formed, and they functioned quite nicely. So what happened in America when he came, this convert, is a sort of a result of what already was there. And the new people would come, they wouldn't stay. And so one of the very first time, it's mentioned there, I visited him. In fact, the very first time. On Saturday I was with Tom, and then Sunday evening, he said to come to me. So I came to him, and he says to me, "We have here 3 Americans, young, your age. One girl, her husband, who is thinking of becoming a priest, and their friend, who's also sort of a seminary boy and so on. I want you to be friends with him. In fact, these are your friends. This is for your life." I said, "What do you mean?" "You'll see." And when I met them, they were just American, converts, they were college students, and they were interested in spiritual life and regular converts. And it turned out to be, I immediately formed contact with them, and up to today, they're my friends and so on. But the Russians that were there were nothing but disaster. And one of them, remember that story, is that Finita la Commedia?
Mm-hmm.
You know, in other words, they didn't feel what he was after. Worse than that, the young priests who were his spiritual sons, my compatriots, you know that, I asked them, send me some information about them. None of them can say anything. In other words, that element, what he was, what made him, takes pain to understand. Thus, Mark the ascetic said, remembrance of God is pain of heart, endured
in a spirit
of devotion. But he who
forgets God becomes self-indulgent and thus insensitive.
So Father Adrian said that having God, you have to pay that price of pain. And then you have to endure that pain in a spirit of blind devotion. Whether you get satisfactions, whether they give you candy or not. Your blind devotion, like a doggy, you're dedicated to your master. As long as your soul is turned towards God. And then God moves you with like a heliotropion, the sunflower moves. God does it. You become part of it. See? But if you don't, like Americans, all of us, and Russians who emigrate who came, the same thing, they forget God. Remembrance of God is pain. They don't want to pain, so therefore they forget God. Once they forget God, then they become self-indulgent and thus insensitive to the whole society, beginning with their own soul. That's where they're miserable. That's why they create a miserable atmosphere. They fight, suicide, all kinds of divorces galore, poor kids running loose, and all this immorality all over. It's a direct result of not wanting to endure that pain. Direct result. Christianity does not exist without a cross. There is no Christianity without a cross. That will be a question in your test. Can you have Christianity without a cross? The answer is
No.
Why? Couldn't God give you salvation without the cross? Why do we have to suffer? Why didn't Jesus have all the power in the world? Why not? Of course he could. Unfortunately, that's the way it is. That's the way it is. If you want to follow Jesus, you certainly got to be crucified. And if you don't, you become phony. And that's what Father Adrian was not. One thing he wasn't. There's not 1/10 of an inch phoniness. He might be dramatic and exaggerated things and screamed, yelled, and rolled in the altar, created, but he certainly was not phony. Because he was a free man and freedom. And that gave him opportunity to, and it's also important that his main theme was these podvi, these righteous men and women. He was constantly talking about them, thinking about them, knew of them, had his portraits of them. Then he lived that world. His spiritual son, Father Vladimir, Father Vladimir. Father Vladimir, which one? 10th from right? Wrong. This one. He was the one who was collecting lives of saints, and then he gave me the inspiration and I dedicated my life to that. And it comes straight from Father Adrian. He knew all the saints well. He also had a wonderful memory. He sees a person once, and he knows the name, his wife's name, his daughter, and he would say, well, how's Dorothy doing? Well, Dorothy's fine. How did you know? You know, just once. And also during confession, he was clairvoyant. He would not sort of accuse you, never accused. See? You have to do it yourself. But he hints. And so you know that he knows what you're talking about, what you're supposed to say. He knows right through. And it's not because he deliberately wanted, because he wanted to help you to get rid of it, because that evidently that bothers your conscience, which is apparent to him. And he is a doctor. He sees that that thing is in the way. So he pull it out, come on, and help and be free of that. Now, the last thing is this. So I mentioned that he was interested in bringing to America Orthodoxy. He felt that that was his call. That was the call of all Orthodox people, these Russian Orthodox immigrants, to come and bring Orthodoxy. Because these immigrants were not here to make a buck, but as a result of having lost their homes, having lost their land to communism. See? And when they began to put roots in American land, they became, as Americans, sort of insensitive, and thus became insensitive and fruitless, and they drift right out. And most of the people, Orthodox people, just left. Most of the Orthodox people in those churches are converts. That's where their life is. And the converts who come to, because of their personal some kind of a difficulty, they come to Jesus, sort of person that Jesus calls them, and then they change their lives according to the way how they understand, how they are presented by the clerics, by the church people, how they understand, so that they can lead a life in accordance with what Orthodoxy demands and how they can adjust themselves to it. It's not less. And then finally, the business of creativity. Father Adrian was talking that he said that each person is endowed with, since man is created in the image of God and God is creator, therefore man naturally is also has the capability, and it's a natural gift, to create, be creative. And he says that the sex drive is actually a creative element. That you create babies, of course, very easy to create babies, but the whole phenomenon of this impulse in us to create comes like babies and so on, like women are saved from childbearing. Women are saved. Men are not, by the way. Even though no matter how what a nice dad you are, you can't save them. You're saved through public. And women can get away with it. Get away. Now, let's not quote that Father Adrian didn't say that way, but that's my interpretation. But what he said is this, that element in us, which is the reproductive drive, doesn't have to take a form of lewd and lust and filth. See? In fact, a married couple is supposed to be totally devoid of all that. It's just that we learn that from the worldly living. But the traditional way of marriage and so on was that, first of all, your marriage is not as a result of your romances, but as prearranged by your parents, and then with your perhaps agreement. And then you are given a job. You have a job to do. You have to produce a soul, a human being, who is supposed to be a potential saint. That's the reason why we have children. So that the amount of saints will supersede the amount of fallen angels. We have a job to do. That's why we can have lots of children. We're supposed to have them. And God will take care of it. And he says, therefore, the drive, the sex drive, is actually a creative element. If you direct it in the right direction, you don't have to be a victim of lust and filth and so on. Not at all. You can become very creative. And he claims that most of the people are not creating, especially within church. Because in the church, they come into church and they think that they are the passive recipients rather than the givers. Zora, are you there? Yeah. The idea is this, that you come to church you of course take the grace and all that, but it's expected that you will also exude it. You're taking it and you come out. Your brother, bear each other the burdens and so forth from the law of Christ. You're fulfilling the law of Christ by bearing burden of your brother. Now where do you get the strength to bear? You have that, evidently you have that creative element. And it does, by bearing your brother's problem, it doesn't mean that there's a particular formula that $25 and 22 cents will do it. No. You have to be creative and find out what gives you trouble. Sometimes you have to pay money, sometimes you have to go and stick your bags and to do something, it's a risk and so on. But you have to be creative. You know, you cannot passively approach it. And another idea, put it down, there is no automatic grace. People think that if you cross yourself correctly, if you receive Holy Communion correctly, as often as possible, then it's all set. It's not at all. There is no guarantee in church. It's all your relationship, your will before God. As the expression is, your standing before the Lord. That's what determines. Those early monks that went to the desert wouldn't receive Holy Communion for tens or decades. Why? Mary of Egypt didn't receive Holy Communion at all. She didn't say, oh, I've been a bad girl, now I have to go and receive Holy Communion every Sunday. She didn't. But her conscience said that there's something in her that has to be cleansed. She has to outgrow that. So she didn't rely on Holy Communion. We're not against Holy Communion, but we're against the idea that, well, Sunday, the more I'll receive Holy Communion, the better it is. So one of my kids says, well, how about every day? Fine. How about every hour? You can have reserved gifts. You can have it. How about every minute? Why don't have some kind of a plastic thing here, and then you drip Holy Communion, then intervene. But then you'll be, like me, carry the sack, like oxygen thing, and then goes in there, and goes Holy Communion. Same logic. Let's say that baptism, baptism. He says to me, Father Herman, the baptizing in the river is not a very good idea. I said, well, why, my dear? Well, look, you are blessing the water, see? And then new water comes in, and then you put another blessed water. So I said, what do you do? Well, you do this. You bless the water, and then run! Quick and dunk and run. And then again, run. And then it'll be nice, see? Then you'll be really baptizing in the blessed water. Well, see, it's logical, see? But that's, again, relying on automatic grace. That you assume that maybe you're a little jerk, no gooder, but you do just the right thing, you get right there, then it'll be all set. Like bibbidi-bobbidi-boo. Same idea. It isn't. And Father Adrian was also constantly his business of Tishina. We, of course, discussed that in an early question. The inward, in the soul, man must find his own place before God. And that place is an inward peace. And when a person seeks peace, let's say in parks and quiet atmosphere and all that, that's seeking external peace. You can be in the noisiest place in the world and you'll have that inward peace. Of course, it's hard to get. I understand. Well, life is not easy. Just to bring up a child is not, it's not a pound of raisins. It's a complicated thing. So, same thing with your spiritual life, even much so. So, Father Adrian was placed like a miracle from Optima to American soil, was highly interested in bringing orthodoxy to Americans, was surrounded constantly with converts. In fact, most of the information I have now about Father Adrian comes from converts, because the Russians refused. His own son refused to send me information, his own son, because I'm a wrong jurisdiction. While then I was, without really, again, externals, thinking of externals. So Father Adrian was interested to bring orthodoxy to this land. And he succeeded. And I say he did. He left the picture, it's clear, those who want, they can get it. Most of the people have not taken it. They just pass by. Let's say, oh, his portrait is there, the old age home, oh, this big portrait is there, and that's about it. But that's not what Father Adrian wanted. What he wanted is to make an impression on this society of Christians of latter times, that element of desert-loving fathers is that element, that deposit, what he got from them, is a living, it's grace. It's a living element. It's like yeast and like leaven. And it is capable to raise people that can understand what it's all about, and perhaps get hooked to the same tradition and spread in this continent. As I said, those people who surrounded him, they missed the boat. Novodzivaya is nothing, not much. His disciples, there's no disciples here, isn't there? At least I don't see any. There are a couple of priests who are very nice, but that's not what Father Adrian was. He was actually a man who started a movement. He had a movement of catacomb, early Christian experience placed in modern times. And it worked through his teaching of ησυχία, or the silence, which he lived. He used all these holy fathers, Father Rekus and others. He lived that thing, he inspired, and we believe he's alive. The message, this jurisdictional question, or rather the fight, the authority bickering of Orthodox people in America is no different than that of the fighting of the Baptists and Presbyterians and Jehovah's Witnesses and all. They all claim the Orthodox about the same thing. The only thing that Orthodox, they have one dogmatic truth, that all, as long as they adhere to the creed, they're Orthodox, Whether they're jurisdictional or sort of administratively in different camps, that really doesn't matter. That's bound up with ethnic backgrounds. You have Serbian and Ethiopians and Russian, Romanians, and they have their own language, a little bit traditions, pilaf, pirashki, and borscht, and so on. But that's all secondary. They are united in the dogma and in spirit. And therefore, all are inheritance of that what Father Adrian represents. But at the same time, due to the fact that the spirit of apostasy also is touching the bishops, the episcopate, who are our leaders, therefore there is an adherence to external correctness in place of spiritual correctness. And Father Adrian was pushing that you have to have spiritually be correct with God, right with God, confession, ησυχία, the common life, and all that. And the external is secondary. It's a shifting of these two values. That's why he said to me, he said, and repeated to others, he said this: sit and do your monastic or your spiritual thing. You have your parish, you have your rosary, you have your swimming pool, you have be satisfied, and don't Russians say. Don't push your noses there and there, better jurisdiction, better group. That's not that important. You're given the same. Sit there with your swimming pool and pray and have your ησυχία. And you don't judge him. You know what I mean? That's best. And if you want to judge, then be aware, if you want to judge, then you are taking upon yourself the whole criteria, the Christian criteria, and you are exalting yourself in the position of judging. Better don't. If you see something is wrong, well, don't take part of it, and you're correct, fine. But therefore, do not sharpen your eye to see the negative thing, because then that negative thing will other people will catch it, and then you'll be responsible for her fault. You'll be responsible because you had that eye. Therefore, he says, sit and do your Christian thing. sacrament services, you see here, and so on. And wait until God will raise confessing bishops. Wait until God will raise confessing bishops. What he means by confessing bishops, it means that ecclesiastical leaders who will be in themselves trained to be confessing the truth before the world. They will have that power, that energy which he had, that they will be fearlessly standing for the truth. They'll confess the truth. Because confession means what? In Greek?
Witness.
Witness or
Martyr.
martyrdom. In other words, you confess unto martyrdom. That type of leaders we don't have. And one priest said to me, what about you? He said that the reason we don't have confessing bishops, because we don't deserve them. We're just jerks. Maybe there even are some, and we don't even see them. Because we're so insensitive, such stoops. You didn't get the point, you don't deserve it. So why bother? Maybe there is a reason, but you're so stupid, so insensitive, you don't get them, you don't see it. You judge here and there, Stop it. Look inward. See what's happening in yourself. And you see that you have a part in the kingdom of God, which is supposed to be within you. And it is, because of your baptism, it is. But it's clogged, it's overgrown, it's total mess with all that thing that you took from the world. Well, clean it up. Put your soul in order. Get rid of all that. And then, that's inner silence will reign, and you will see God. Is that understandable? Mm-hmm. All right. Father Dempsey says, don't ask them with any questions, because that'll be another 2 hours of lecture. So I will not ask with any questions. If you have any questions, put it down. Father Michael here is able to answer. I can answer in due time. Meanwhile, I'd like very much to bid you good night. Supposed to rest for a while?
No, you're supposed to have our class.